Hey guys, tonight we're headed back to the marble-paved streets of ancient Rome, not to see gladiators or emperors or epic feasts, but to investigate something a little less glamorous and a lot more regular. That's right. Tonight we're following the rhythms of ancient Roman bathroom breaks. Because if there's one thing the Romans took surprisingly seriously, it's scheduling when and where to poop. You're standing in the shade of a stone colonnade. It's early morning. The streets are just beginning to hum olive oil vendors wheeling their carts, a sleepy baker yawning beside his brick oven. The air smells like rising dough and distant incense. And nearby, tucked beside the outer wall of a bustling bathhouse, is your destination, the public latrina. Now, before we go further, quick warning, you probably won't survive this. No privacy, no plumbing in the way you're used to, no toilet paper either, and the sponge on a stick. Oh, we'll get to that. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing this sleepy little community across time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk through the threshold past stone mosaics and chipped frescoes of nymphs and dolphins. Ahead is a large room, long rectangular, with arched windows high above. The light spills in just enough to highlight the row of low, flat stone benches lining the walls, and each bench a series of evenly spaced holes, roughly a foot apart, each with a carved channel running below like a tiny trough. You've just entered one of Rome's hundreds of public toilets. Here's the thing, the Romans didn't treat toilets as gross, shameful, or hidden. These were communal social spaces, and in many cities, they were built like mini temples, arched ceilings, decorative statues. Some even had piped music or gentle fountains gurgling in the background, all designed to make your business feel more like a pause in your day rather than an emergency detour. And unlike the chaotic bathroom sprints of modern life, ancient Romans didn't just go when they felt like it. They often followed daily routines, especially in busy urban centers like Rome, Ostia, and Pompeii. You'd get up, have a light breakfast, maybe some bread soaked in wine, and then head to the latrina before going to the baths or the forum. Why? Because the next opportunity might not come until late afternoon. Latrine stops were built into the flow of the day. Mainstream historians generally agree that most working-class Romans didn't have private toilets in their homes. Instead, they relied on shared facilities, often built into the street-level sections of insules, the Roman apartment blocks. These were either free or cost a small fee, and they were typically open early in the day, cleaned at scheduled intervals by sanitation crews known as the curatores cloacarum. But here's the quirky bit. Some scholars argue that certain neighborhoods developed unspoken toilet shifts. Early morning was reserved for bakers and bathhouse workers, midday for merchants and scribes, evenings. Well, that's when things got chaotic. Think lines chatter and a lot of very tired feet. And what about at night? Some historians believe that after dark, many latrines were off limits, partly for safety and partly because the Romans were weirdly superstitious about nocturnal bathroom visits. But we'll get to that in a later section. Right now, you sit carefully on one of the cool stone benches. There's no partition, no modesty wall, just the sound of trickling water flowing through the trough beneath you, a constant stream supplied by Rome's aqueducts. This water washed waste into the city's underground sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima, a marvel of engineering that's still partially intact today. You look to your left. A middle-aged man in a tunic nods politely. To your right, a woman in a linen stola chats with her friend about fish prices. Conversations is casual, the vibe surprisingly civilized. This isn't just a toilet, it's a social venue, a pause in the rush of Roman life, and maybe oddly a place to think. Some Romans even claimed that their best ideas came during their latrine visits, like a very early version of shower thoughts. As you shift on the bench and careful not to lose your balance, you spot a worn inscription etched into the stone wall. Faint, but still readable. It says, "Fortuna favors the clean." Whether that's a joke, a public health reminder, or both, it's a window into how seriously the Romans took cleanliness order and public function, even in the least glamorous corners of their empire. So yes, tonight we're telling the story of Rome's toilet schedules. And trust me, this isn't even the weirdest part. You've survived your first Roman latrina experience. Congratulations. Now step back outside carefully. The paving stones are slick from fresh water runoff, and there's a strong scent of rosemary in the air, probably from the nearby food vendor, roasting something you hope isn't fish innards. The sun is only just rising above the tiled rooftops. Shadows stretch across the streets like sleepy cats, and the first real bustle of the city is beginning to stir. This is a sacred moment in Roman scheduling, the post-dawn lull before the forums explode with activity. And for many Romans, it was also the best time to sneak in a bathroom break. Here's something oddly soothing. The Romans actually prefer to do their business early in the day, not out of urgency, but because they believed it was healthiest. Physicians like Galen and Celsus encouraged early morning eliminations, arguing that it aligned with the body's natural cycles. The idea was, you wake, you void, you balance the humors. Boom, day begun. And so, around the second hour after sunrise, the latrines began to fill up, but slowly, quietly. It was the hour of scribes and older citizens, of students in togas, too big for them, and of retired legionnaires who still woke up before the roosters. These folks treated morning bathroom time as a ritual. A slow one. You follow one such figure now, a thin man with papyrus tucked under his arm, into a smaller latrina near the edge of the forum. This one is older, less decorative. The benches are worn smooth from years of use, the water channel a bit more sluggish. But here's what makes it special silence. No chatter, no casual gossip. Just the faint sound of sandals shuffling across stone, the hush of water, and the occasional throat clearing. This was the latrine for those who needed focus, who didn't want to be disturbed, who saw this moment not just as necessity, but meditation. It's a strange idea, isn't it? A quiet toilet being a luxury. But in a city of over 1 million people, noise was everywhere. So those first hours when the city hadn't yet hit full speed were like gold. And toilets, strangely enough, were one of the few places where a citizen could be alone with their thoughts, even in the company of others. And here's the fringe detail: some wealthy Romans actually scheduled their mornings around latrine access. If their favorite spot near the baths was too busy, they'd send a slave ahead to reserve a space or to wait in line. You laugh now, but it's not much different from lining up outside your favorite coffee shop, just smellier. Historians still debate how formal these morning toilet hours really were. Some say they were socially accepted rhythms. Others believe written records exaggerate their consistency. But physical evidence, the wear patterns on benches, the flow maps of ancient sewers, suggest that yes, there were windows of heavier use. And early morning was prime time. The reasoning wasn't just medical, it was logistical. Bathhouses typically opened mid-morning. Markets kicked into gear a little before noon. If you didn't want to rush from the forum halfway through a legal hearing or excuse yourself during a heated grain price negotiation, you went early. Then you could face the day with confidence and no surprises. You notice now a young woman entering the latrine, hair pinned high, carrying a small vial of perfumed oil. She's likely on her way to the baths and stopping here first. As she sits, she dabs the oil on her neck, not out of vanity, but to mask the more pungent scents of the room. Smart. Next to her, a slave stands patiently holding a bucket of clean water and a cloth. And on the wall behind them, a faded sundial painted in red ochre with notches at the 3rd and 6th hour. Scholars believe these notches might have marked preferred usage windows for different social classes. Early hours for free citizens, later ones for slaves and laborers. If that's true, it's a latrine schedule disguised as public art. You're starting to get it now. The rhythm of Roman bathroom breaks wasn't about convenience. It was about harmony, predictability, knowing when to step in and when to wait. So you step back into the street. The light is brighter now, the smell's sharper, the voice is louder. Rome is waking up. But for those early risers who've already answered nature's call, it's the best part of the day. And as for you, you might just need a sponge on a stick next. You've seen the early birds. Now stick around a while, because mid-morning in ancient Rome is when things get truly communal. If you thought Roman toilets were awkward before, wait until you witness them at peak social hour. You follow a group of merchants down a side street, past olive oil stalls and a very vocal fishmonger toward another public latrina tucked beside a bustling market. This one is large or big enough to accommodate a dozen people at once and built like a semicircle facing inward, which means yes, everyone is looking at everyone else. You step inside and the room hits you with the scent of damp, stone-wet wool and fennel. The soundscape, a gentle trickle of water, overlapping conversations, the occasional snort of laughter. You pause, trying not to trip over the raised threshold, and take in the space-polished marble floors, a wide basin in the center for hand washing, and along the curved walls, low stone benches punctuated with clean oval-shaped openings. This is where the Romans sat, not in stalls, not in private, just side by side, hip-to-hip robes hiked up and dignity checked at the door. Now here's the part that might unsettle your modern sensibilities. These latrines had no partitions, no dividers, no privacy screens, just in public togetherness. You take a seat and try to look relaxed. No one seems to mind you're there. To your left, two older men in faded togas are deep in conversation about olive futures. To your right, a teenage boy is nervously reciting lines from Cicero, clearly prepping for some kind of school recitation. Across from you, a woman fans herself with a woven reed mat and whispers gossip to her neighbor, who nods sagely while reaching for something tucked beside the bench. It's a stick, With a sponge, here it is, the infamous tersorium, a wooden rod topped with a soft sea sponge, moistened with vinegar or salt water, and used for cleaning up after the, well, business part. And yes, it was communal. When finished, users would rinse it in the water channel running beneath the bench. You eye it warily and try not to shift too much. Now, before you grimace too hard, remember in ancient Rome, the idea of personal hygiene was different. Shared spaces weren't necessarily unhygienic, they were normal. The sponge wasn't seen as gross, it was seen as efficient. And the running water that was innovation. Modern scholars agree that these communal latrines were a kind of civic pride. They were built near forums markets and bathhouses not hidden away in alleys. They were maintained by the city, cleaned regularly by attendants, and even decorated with mosaics and paintings. Public health, Roman style. But there's an odd twist here. While toilets were open, the act of using them wasn't considered shameful, the sound was. Some sources suggest that people tried to go quietly, talking over the noise, or clearing throats to cover it. A kind of polite cover-up, Roman edition. And if you're wondering whether people just stared at each other, the answer is yes, but also no. These were places of light conversation, shared jokes, even debates. Philosophers were known to hold impromptu discussions in the latrines. Deals were brokered, news was shared. It was less about awkwardness and more about opportunity. In fact, some historians argue that latrines were a crucial part of Roman networking culture. If you wanted to meet someone powerful, you didn't necessarily schedule a formal meeting. You might just happen to bump into them during a bathroom break. Not subtle, but effective. You glance up and notice an inscription carved into the wall above the entrance, Necessitas non habet legem. Necessity has no law. A reminder that when nature calls, everyone's equal. Senator or slave, merchant or mason. And while you're pondering that democratic little slogan, a sudden gust of wind blows through the arched window. It carries the scent of cumin and charcoal from the street and reminds you that the day is warming fast. Soon the latrine will be less social and more sweaty. Best to move on. As you step out into the light, someone behind you calls out a joke, something about slippery benches and bad timing. You smile politely, because now you get it. This wasn't just a place to go. It was a place to be. A Roman bathroom break wasn't about hiding. It was about being part of the city's heartbeat, every pulse, every whisper, every flush. And we're only just getting started. You've seen the benches, you've seen the sponge, you've seen the total lack of doors. But now it's time to meet the tersorium up close. And yes, it's exactly as memorable as it sounds. Back in the shade of a quieter alley, you find a smaller latrine, one tucked behind a wine vendor's shop, with fewer users and a little more wear. There's no gleaming marble here, just well-worn stone and the faint smell of vinegar. This was the kind of place used by local workers, baker's delivery boys, maybe a retired centurion with sore knees. You step inside and spot it instantly leaning against the wall beside a bucket of murky liquid is the sponge stick, the tersorium, a short, slightly curved wooden rod roughly the length of your forearm with what looks like a lump of gray sea sponge lashed tightly to the end. Charming, isn't it? This wasn't just Roman innovation, it was Roman practicality. toilet paper as we know it didn't exist. The rich might have had scraps of cloth or soft wool, but for the average person, especially in public toilets, it was this tool of hygiene and community. Use, rinse, leave for the next person. You glance at the small bucket it rests in. It's filled with a mixture of water, vinegar, and salt meant to clean the sponge between uses. It's cloudy. You decide not to breathe too deeply. But here's the fascinating bit: Romans didn't seem bothered by this. In fact, ancient writers rarely mention the tersorium with disgust. They just accepted it. And considering they also used communal bath sponges, shared oil scrapers, strigils, and often dined elbow to elbow at low couches, perhaps it wasn't so shocking. In fact, some archaeologists argue that the tersorium was seen as civilized, a step above using leaves, pebbles, or seashells. Yes, that was also a thing in other ancient cultures. It was efficient, easy to clean, and when vinegar was available, probably helped kill some germs. Probably. Historians still debate exactly how widespread the tersorium was. Was it in every toilet, only public ones? Did people bring their own? One theory suggests that wealthier citizens may have owned personal versions, nicely carved sticks with finer sponges, maybe even stored in decorative holders near their private bathrooms. Toilet luxury, Roman style. You glance at the wall beside the bench and notice something you hadn't before: a small ledge carved into the stone just above thigh height. A sponge shelf. That's how regular this was. Now here's your quirky fact of the day. One tersorium was reportedly thrown at a tax collector in a tavern. No joke. The incident, described by a Roman satirist, involved a drunken dispute, a bad joke about grain taxes, and the unfortunate misuse of a bathroom implement as a weapon. Let's just say sanitation and street justice occasionally overlapped. But the tersorium wasn't the only option. Some Romans, especially those traveling or working in rural areas, used smooth stones, scraps of broken pottery called pessoi, or in a pinch bare hands, followed by a good rinse. Compared to that, the communal sponge on a stick seems almost elegant. Still seated, you lean back against the cool stone wall and imagine the rhythm of it all enter. Sit to do your business. Reach for the sponge rinse, return. The flow was habitual, synchronized like every part of Roman society. Structured, predictable, efficient, and all of it, you realize, tied to water. Aqueducts didn't just bring drinking water. They powered fountains, public baths, and yes, flushed the latrines. The flowing channels beneath the seats weren't decoration, they were critical. Without constant water flow, waste would linger, smells would rise, and the city would suffer. So every sponge you see, every tersorium soaked in vinegar, represents more than just a cleaning tool. It represents Rome's obsession with order and engineering, even in the most human of moments. As you leave the latrine, you spot a mosaic just outside the doorway. A dolphin leaps above stylized waves, and beneath it a Latin phrase, "Salus per aquam health," through water. You chuckle, because sometimes even ancient signage had a sense of humor. And if you're wondering whether you'll ever look at a sponge the same way again, don't worry. That's part of the charm. Step out of that quiet latrine and into the bright pulse of the Roman day. By now, the city is alive. Forum crowds swell carts, creak over cobbles, and crows shout from tiled rooftops like they're auditioning for a tragic play. But beneath the surface, Something less obvious is flowing the water. The aqueducts hum silently with purpose, fueling everything from public baths to fountains to, yes, latrines. Because in Rome, time flowed with water. You wander along the Via Nova, passing towering columns and temples, and beneath your sandals, you can hear it faintly, the quiet gurgle of moving water just beneath the street. Rome's famous Cloaca Maxima, one of the oldest sewage systems in the world, still channels waste away from the center of the city like the ancient veins of a sleeping giant. But here's where it gets fascinating. That same water helped schedule the city's bathroom habits. The public latrines weren't just random stone benches, they were carefully placed along the water grid. A consistent stream was necessary, not just to wash away waste, but to rinse sponges, cool the air, and muffle sound. Without water, the entire toilet system backed up literally and socially, and that's why the timing of use often revolved around aqueduct flow patterns. Certain hours of the day saw stronger flow thanks to gravity and upstream distribution. Midday, when water was diverted to bathhouses or fountains toilets, might slow down. That meant people either planned their visit early or waited for the system to catch up. This is one reason why Temple Bell's market stalls and toilet seats were subtly synced. The bath attendants knew when to open, the bread makers knew when to sell, and the public knew when to go before the pipes got busy. Mainstream historians agree Rome's plumbing wasn't just impressive, it was foundational. Everything from social rituals to private relief was built around aqueduct rhythm. Some even argue that Rome's empire was as much a product of water engineering as it was of military strength. Conquered cities didn't get marble, they got pipes. Now for a strange little tidbit, some latrines had water clocks, nearby devices that marked a time using the flow of water through a small container. They weren't just decorative, they helped people gauge how long to wait for flow to resume. If the trough beneath the seat stopped trickling, you simply waited, stared at a fresco, and maybe reflected on your life choices. And here's where the scholarly debate kicks in. Some researchers believe latrine usage was informally timed with people limiting their visits to brief windows. Others think that was just idealistic record keeping. No one was timing anything, and chaos reigned as usual. The truth, probably a little of both. But let's talk about design. You step into a large latrine near the baths of Caracalla. It's cooler here, shaded by towering arches with smooth stone seats polished to a soft shine. Above each bench, a carved relief of water symbols waves jugs, sea serpents, reminding visitors that the room depended on the continuous flow. This latrine, like many others, had three parts: the seating area, a foot-level trough for cleaning the tersorium, and a raised wash basin at the entrance for hands. And each part required constant water. The Romans didn't think of this as luxury. They thought of it as efficiency. A well-flushed toilet meant fewer flies, fewer smells, fewer problems. It also meant a more orderly day. Imagine if you had to plan your errands around bathroom function. Romans did exactly that. And when things went wrong, they noticed. Records exist of public complaints about slow water clogged drains or sewer smells reaching the forum steps. One inscription on a city wall reads, "Let the curators fix the stink, or I shall defecate on their sandals." Harsh, maybe, but effective. You sit quietly now, watching a young boy refill the sponge bucket with fresh vinegar water. He hums to himself, moving with the rhythm of the task. It's not glamorous, it's not heroic, but it's vital, because in Rome, water was life and timing was everything. And when both came together, even going to the bathroom became a kind of ritual, measured, predictable, oddly soothing. You stand again, stepping into the light. The fountains are still flowing, the city still humming, and beneath it all, Rome's oldest system continues hidden but never forgotten, just like its toilet schedule. Now that you've soaked in the rhythm of Roman water, it's time to focus on something just as ritualistic: bathhouses, and how they shaped the timing of bathroom breaks in ancient Rome. You follow the scent of warmed oils and the echo of sandals slapping stone to the grand entrance of the thermae. This isn't just a place to wash, it's a full-on wellness center, civic hangout, and daily reset button rolled into one. But before you even think of getting undressed and oily, there's a step that most Romans never skipped: the latrina. You pass through the threshold into the atrium of the Baths of Trajan. Columns rise like sun-bleached tree trunks, and a fine mist from the nearby caldarium wafts into the air. Somewhere deep inside, steam hisses and voices murmur. But to your right, just beside a marble basin for feet washing, you spot a sign carved into the wall: non intres sordidus, do not enter dirty. And yes, in this context, dirty includes unfinished business. You head toward the bath's adjoining latrine. It's busier here than other toilets you've visited. This one is used like a checkpoint. One last stop before entering the complex. Merchants, magistrates, mosaic artists. They all pause here first, hiking up their tunics, chatting about the weather, or whispering the latest Senate gossip as they prepare to well cleanse both inside and out. The structure is sleek, and impressive white marble benches, polished brass sconces holding flickering lamps, and running water that sounds like a tiny, well-mannered stream. Everything here gleams slightly. Even the tersoriums are stacked neatly in a rack, as if someone's been polishing the sponge handles like dinnerware. Here's a neat fact: some bathhouses even had toilet attendants, responsible for cleaning, refilling vinegar jars, and managing the sponge situation. They weren't high-ranking, but they were essential and often tipped for good service. Mainstream historians widely agree that toilets were a standard part of the bath routine. Many Romans used them immediately before entering the tepidarium, or lukewarm chamber, so they could relax without interruption. If you've ever tried to meditate on a full bladder, you'll understand why. And for women who had fewer public latrines throughout the city, bathhouse visits were a chance to find a reliable and relatively private toilet. Some facilities offered gender-segregated latrines, though in many locations it was simply a matter of timing and modest curtain placement. You take a seat carefully and glance at the wall beside you. A painted fresco depicts a reclining figure holding a sponge and smiling serenely. Beside it, a playful inscription reads, "Venit aqua, venit requis," the water comes, and so does rest. That's really how the Romans saw it. The bathhouse wasn't just a place to clean, it was where the day reset. And starting that reset with a bowel movement that was part of the flow. Pun entirely intended. But here's your quirky bit: bathhouse latrines were also used for matchmaking. Stay with me, because these spaces were so social and often separated from more formal environments, People chatted freely. Matches were arranged, marriages negotiated, even flings plotted. One piece of graffiti from Pompeii, scrawled near a bathhouse latrine, reads, "I came for steam, but stayed for her eyes." Poetry maybe, creepy a little, Roman very. Scholars still debate how much actual romance bloomed in bath latrines, or if that's just wishful interpretation. But there's no denying the vibe relaxed, intimate, and well flushed with possibilities. You finish up and move back into the atrium. Someone hands you a towel, another offers oil. Your sponge adventure is behind you now, hopefully, and you're ready for the next phase of the day. But remember, the toilet wasn't a pit stop. It was part of the ritual, as baked into the Roman daily schedule as the bath, the forum, or the evening wine. And as you dip your feet into the warm pool ahead, you realize something unexpectedly peaceful about it all, even in the heart of empire, among all the architecture, ambition, and empire building. Someone still had to manage the sponge rack, and they probably did it well. You've passed through the bathhouse like a proper citizen, refreshed and maybe slightly over-sanitized by vinegar sponge proximity. But now the sun is past its zenith, and Rome is shifting into a slower, warmer rhythm. It's siesta time, and for many Romans, that meant one of two things: a nap or a stroll, followed by a latrine visit. This next stop, the kind of toilet you'd never expect. A private domestic latrine. Yes, those existed. You duck into a shaded alley and step through the entry of a domus, one of Rome's elite townhouses. Instantly, the chaos of the streets fades. Inside, sunlight spills across mosaic tiles, and the air smells of beeswax, olive oil, and laurel. A household slave bows as you pass the atrium, leading you toward a small chamber tucked behind the triclinium, the dining room. And there it is, a single-seat latrina enclosed behind a painted wooden door. Modest, functional, and gloriously private. In wealthier homes, this wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Entertaining guests, you didn't want them squatting with the masses. Your own family, they deserved quiet dignity. And so, tucked between the walls of marble-lined halls and libraries, you'd often find a surprisingly simple stone seat, flushed by a small cistern and serviced by underground drains. Now here's something unexpected. These private toilets weren't always indoors. Many were semi-open, built into quiet corners of a peristyle garden surrounded by greenery. It might seem strange, but imagine sitting among roses and myrtle birds chirping in a fig tree above, while a servant stands discreetly out of sight, ready to refill the hand-washing basin. That's Roman serenity. Mainstream historians agree that private toilets were a mark of status, but also practicality. With unpredictable forum crowds and bathhouse lines, having a home facility just made sense. And for elderly family members or those recovering from illness, it could be essential. But don't picture velvet cushions and golden taps. Even the grandest domus toilet was more utilitarian than opulent. Stone seat, water pot, vinegar bucket, maybe a painted fresco of Mercury, god of travelers, and apparently of urgent bodily needs. You take a seat more out of curiosity than necessity. The stone is cool, smooth, and surprisingly ergonomic. Someone clearly thought about angles and drainage. Beside you, a sponge rests in a bronze holder, and above it a shelf of fresh herbs, rosemary, bay leaf, and rue, likely meant to perfume the space. And then you spot it scratched faintly into the wall behind the door. A name, Lucia Fecit Hic. Lucia was here. Ah, ancient graffiti. It never disappoints. Here's your quirky moment. Romans weren't shy about bathroom wall scrawls. Some were jokes, others flirtations. One famous line from Pompeii reads, "Weep you girls." My charm has left the latrine, bold and slightly confusing. Back to the present, you exit the latrine and notice the household's toilet schedule etched on a clay tablet near the kitchen. Not a formal timetable, but gentle rules: morning use for adults, midday for servants, evening for children. A kind of domestic choreography. Scholars still argue whether these were widespread customs or unique to elite households. But what's clear is that latrine etiquette existed unspoken perhaps, but deeply woven into Roman daily life. You continue exploring the house, noting the other rhythms, the afternoon nap zones, the laundry corner, the shrine to the household gods. And behind it all, the quiet hum of careful routine. Rome wasn't chaos. Rome was order, even in the toilet. And for the lucky few with access to private latrines, that order meant comfort control, and let's face it, less time negotiating sponge logistics with strangers. So as you step back onto the sunlit street, you carry with you a new appreciation for the simplest of luxuries. A toilet all your own. You've now experienced public toilets, private latrines, sponge rituals, and even graffiti confessions. But now it's time to go somewhere a bit more philosophical. Because in ancient Rome, the bathroom wasn't just a place to relieve yourself, it was a place to reflect. And sometimes, even to philosophize. You stroll into the quieter part of a sprawling villa on the Palatine Hill. Beyond the courtyard of laurel trees, past the triclinium with its reclining couches, you're led to a domed chamber tucked neatly between two libraries. Yes, libraries. Because this was the latrina of a senator. And that senator he liked to read while he did his business. It's cooler in here, quieter too. The walls are painted a deep terracotta, and a single flickering oil lamp casts shadows over scroll racks mounted above the toilet seat. There's even a low marble shelf carved with a shallow groove, perfect for propping up a scroll. This was no accident. C for Rome's elite time, spent on the latrine, could double as a moment of clarity. No interruptions, no crowds. Just the soothing trickle of water, the echo of one's own thoughts, and maybe a copy of Seneca or Cicero to accompany the process. It sounds odd, but it's well documented Roman intellectuals often wrote about bodily functions, not with embarrassment, but with a strange kind of detachment. To them, digestion and defecation were part of the natural order, worthy of thought, maybe even improvement. One philosopher, Musonius Rufus, reportedly lectured his students on the balance of the body and soul using latrine metaphors. And Seneca himself joked in a letter that he couldn't escape gossip even on the toilet, adding, "My rear receives more quiet than my ears." An image for the ages. Now here's the quirky bit. Some Romans believed that a person's thoughts were purer, cleaner, even while eliminating waste. It was as if physical release made way for mental clarity. Scholars still debate whether this was widespread or just the indulgent musings of upper-class thinkers with too much time and too little modesty. But either way, the image is compelling. Imagine a senator squatting on a polished stone seat, one hand on his sponge stick, the other gesturing mid-monologue about stoic virtue. The mind and the bowels working together. You reach for a scroll resting nearby. The script is elegant, the title familiar, De Brevitate Vitae, on the shortness of life. There's something deeply ironic about reading it here, but also somehow fitting. This room is more than a latrine. It's a sanctuary of thought, and it's not alone. In some wealthy homes, the bathroom was integrated into study suites. Attendants brought warm towels, and oils freshened the air with incense, and kept the sponge water changed regularly. The goal, a setting as dignified as the task, was undignified. Mainstream historians agree that Roman elite embraced this contradiction. Cleanliness was virtue. Moderation was key. But so was reflection, even in places where others might only see stone and steam. You lean back and let the hum of the water lull you. The sound is almost musical now, punctuated only by the occasional drip from a marble basin. Above the seat, a painted inscription reads mens sana in corpore sano, a healthy mind in a healthy body. And now it all makes sense. In Rome, every space could be sacred, even a latrine, if used with intention, if treated with care, if respected for what it provided. As you step back into the villa's corridor, scroll in hand, you pass a young scribe, jotting notes near the doorway. He nods politely and mutters something about drafting a treatise on bathwater temperature. You smile, because really, who needs a modern office when you've got plumbing privacy and a perfectly placed scroll shelf? You leave behind the philosophical latrine of the senator, still amused at the idea of deep thoughts shared with deeper. Well, let's move on and head toward a completely different part of Roman life, the streets. Because for all the polished marble and sponge etiquette, there's one unavoidable fact about ancient cities. Not everyone had access to a proper toilet. So let's talk about where people went when they had nowhere to go. You step into a crowded residential block, a insula, as the Romans called them. These were apartment-style buildings, often 4 to 5 stories tall, made of brick and wood, packed with families, merchants, students, and travelers. And for most of them, there were no bathrooms inside. That's right. No private toilets, no running water, just stairwells, shared hallways, and a bucket if you were lucky. For those who lived on the lower floors, it wasn't too bad. You could pop out to a nearby public latrine. But if you lived on the 4th or 5th floor, it meant one of two things: holding it or using a chamber pot, a small ceramic or metal vessel that doubled as your emergency bathroom. And then, what? Well, here comes the chaotic part. In the dead of night, or during early morning hours, residents often dumped the contents of their chamber pots out the window. Yes, really, you pass under a narrow alley now and instinctively hug the wall as if you know what's coming. A woman above leans out, glances both ways, and tips a small clay pot downward. You hear the splash, not water, definitely not water, and the whole scene is so routine, no one even flinches. This was a part of daily life. And to avoid it, Romans had a habit they shouted: "Cave watch out." It was both a warning and a courtesy. And if you didn't move fast enough, well, that's on you. Historians still argue whether this practice was tolerated or simply unregulated, especially in crowded districts. Some Roman laws forbade throwing anything from upper floors that might harm someone, but harm was often interpreted loosely. Wet tunics, mild inconvenience. Broken skull from a chamber pot lid may be a legal issue. Here's your quirky detail some tenants got creative. Instead of dumping waste directly, they lowered pots with ropes and poured them discreetly near gutters. Others had chutes wooden slide systems built from the wall to direct mess into the street drain. Ingenious and slightly disgusting. But the issue wasn't just smell or street hygiene. It was public image. You stroll into a forum now, watching a politician address a small crowd. His white toga gleams in the sun. He speaks of laws, honor virtue, and then glances to his left, disgusted. A puddle seeps from the edge of the paving stones, suspiciously aromatic. Even the senators weren't immune. In response, some wealthy neighborhoods lobbied to have more public latrines built, especially near markets, forums, and temples. They hired private cleaners. Some even employed men to stand beneath windows and shout reminders not to dump during daylight hours. Yes, human noise detectors. And still, Rome never quite fixed the problem. Even with aqueducts, sewer systems, and sponge sticks galore, there were too many people and too few places to go. So they shouted, they sidestepped, they lived with it. And honestly, you kind of admire the flexibility. Because if there's one thing Rome teaches you over and over again, it's this order is always fighting chaos. Sponge meets splash, tiled floor meets chamber pot, and somehow society rolls on. You pause at a food vendor's stall, savoring the scent of honey cakes and spiced wine, and you wonder just how many layers of civilization we truly build atop our most basic needs. Then you hear it, cave. You jump instinctively, and yes, that saved your tunic. After your near miss under the insula window, an experience you won't forget. No matter how many honey cakes you consume, you take a quieter path through the city. The sun has dipped low, now casting warm gold across the rooftops and cloaking alleyways in cooling shadow. You're heading toward the edge of the Suburra, one of the most notorious neighborhoods in Rome. Bustling, crowded, and unashamedly loud, the Suburra was home to artisans, tavern keepers, poets, ex-gladiators, and anyone else who didn't quite fit among marble columns and pristine domus courtyards. And here the toilet culture is creative. You walk past a small wine shop where patrons are clustered around a wooden counter, sipping diluted red from clay cups. Beside the shop is something that at first looks like a long bench, but no, those holes aren't for sitting while sipping. They're part of a communal street latrine, exposed to the air, half shaded by an overhanging awning. In the Suburra, everything was multifunctional. Space was scarce. Time was money. So why not combine a trip to the latrine with gossip commerce and even a light snack? You approach cautiously. There's a young man perched on the edge, chatting with a vendor about prices for fresh garum while casually holding a sponge on a stick. Someone else is rolling dice on the stone floor between the foot channels. A musician plays a soft melody nearby, collecting tips from passers-by with strong stomachs. It's strange, but not unpleasant. And here's something odd even in this chaotic corner of Rome. There's a kind of code. People wait their turn. They nod politely. They don't look directly at one another, but they speak freely. Historians still debate how common these open-air setups were. Some claim they were emergency latrines for festival days or high-traffic areas. Others argue that this was simply how working-class Romans lived without shame, without privacy, and without sponge reservations. And that's your quirky tidbit. For today, portable sponges were a thing. Yes. If you were heading out for the day and unsure of toilet availability or sponge cleanliness, you might bring your own. Hung from a belt or tucked into a satchel, this personal sanitation tool marked you as someone prepared. Kind of like carrying tissues or hand sanitizer today, but slightly more absorbent. You watch as a woman with a basket of figs lifts her tunic, does her business with practiced efficiency, and then returns to haggling over fruit. No fanfare, no drama, just life continuing on. There's a kind of resilience here, a fluidity that adapts to whatever the city throws at you. In the forums, toilets are polished. In the subura, they're improvised. But either way, they work. And that's the beauty of Rome's bathroom culture. It didn't demand perfection. It demanded participation. You follow the slope of the street downhill toward a murky stream where waste collects before joining the main sewer system. A boy scrubs a wooden bench nearby, splashing water scented faintly with vinegar and rosemary. His mother instructs him from a doorway, nodding toward a slop bucket he's forgotten to empty. Discipline, too, had a place in the system. Some insulas even had posted rules for their tenants. No dumping after the third hour. No sponge sharing outside of family. No using the toilet as an armchair for late-night drinking. Whether these were obeyed is another story, but the effort was there. You pause now at a public fountain to wash your hands. The water runs cool over your fingers, carrying away dust, sweat, and whatever else may have found you on your latrine tour. And for a moment, you're struck by the sheer constancy of it all. From the poorest alley to the emperor's villa, Romans had systems. They had rules. They had expectations around this most fundamental part of daily life. And while those systems weren't always elegant, they were incredibly effective. They made a city of 1 million people manageable. They made daily life bearable. They made human needs human. So as you dry your hands on a strip of linen and glance up at the pink-orange Roman sky, you realize something. Rome didn't just conquer the world with swords and Senate decrees. It did it with plumbing. Now that you've rinsed your hands and restored your dignity, mostly let's take a detour into the unexpected, the spiritual side of Roman bathroom breaks. You wouldn't think temples and toilets shared much common ground, but in Rome, boundaries blurred in fascinating ways. You make your way through a quiet garden behind a temple devoted to Fortuna, goddess of luck. Incense lingers in the air, and doves strut confidently between offerings. Just beyond a laurel hedge lies a small roofed structure, simple, square, and utterly unassuming. It's a sacred latrine. That's right. A place to relieve yourself and whisper a prayer. Because for Romans, bodily functions were part of life, and life was inseparable from the gods. So it shouldn't surprise you that they had deities specifically assigned to sanitation. You enter the latrine and spot a tiny niche carved into the stone wall. Inside sits a small figurine, half goat, half man holding a basin. This is Cloetina, the goddess of the sewer. More than just a plumbing icon, Cloetina represented purity, cleansing, and transition, literal and spiritual. Romans often left tokens near her shrines, flower petals, bits of broken pottery, or curiously a tiny wax foot. Why a foot, scholars still debate. Maybe it symbolized walking safely past the filth. Maybe it was a metaphor for health. What's quirky here is that temple staff maintained these sacred toilets, keeping them swept, perfumed, and stocked with fresh water. Some even left written invocations beside the sponge rack verses asking for good digestion, freedom from parasites, or protection from embarrassing noises during feast days. You look up and notice a poem carved into the lintel. Bless me, Cloacina, as I shed my burdens. Guide my bowels as you guide the Tiber. Poetic, maybe. Overly literal, definitely. Mainstream historians agree that Rome's sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima, was not just engineering brilliance, but a symbol of civil order. Keeping waste moving meant keeping society running, and Cloacina, whose name literally means the purifier, was venerated at the heart of it all. You step outside and pass a small altar beside a trickling spring. It's another toilet site, this one outdoors, hidden in the garden wall. A young boy washes his hands while his father lights a tiny oil lamp, murmuring thanks to Stercoleus, a lesser god associated with manure fertilization, and yes, poop. The Romans didn't hide these things. They honored them. Even Saturn, the ancient god of time and cycles, was sometimes invoked in rural latrine rituals, as if to say this too shall pass, literally and metaphorically. And here's your mind-bending tidbit of the day some elite Romans hosted toilet blessings for newborns. Yes, families would ceremonially introduce babies to the household latrine, lighting incense and sprinkling flower water over the basin, asking the gods to grant the child regularity, cleanliness, and grace. Scholars still debate how widespread this was, but archaeological evidence shows votive figurines of babies placed near bathroom altars, because in a culture so obsessed with balance between indulgence and discipline, appetite and restraint, it makes sense that even elimination had its sacred space. As you wander back toward the main street, you pass a shrine that blends right into a wall. No statue, no pedestal, just a circle of bricks and a carved tile showing a swirling stream, a neighborhood symbol of respect for the unseen forces that kept the drains clear and the nights peaceful. And that's the hidden truth here. Romans weren't ashamed of bodily needs. They understood that a clean, functioning bathroom wasn't just convenience, it was harmony, a gesture to the gods, and a very practical form of prayer. From sacred sewer gods to sponge diplomacy, you've already seen that Roman toilet life was anything but boring. But now, let's wander towards something even more relatable: how Romans handled bathroom breaks on the go, because not everyone was lounging in a domus or performing rituals to Cloacina. Some were traveling across provinces, marching with legions, working on distant farms, or simply stuck at the market for hours without a sponge in sight. So, where did they go? You're walking now along the Via Appia, the legendary Roman road, stretching out like a sun-drenched ribbon across hills and farmland. Dust clings to your sandals. The wind kicks up the scent of pine and horses. And up ahead, you spot a roadside milestone, weathered by time and scribbled with traveler graffiti. But just behind it, tucked into a grove of cypress trees, is something far more important: a public way station latrine. It's small, just a single-seat structure, built from local stone, partially hidden from the road. But inside, a recessed bench, a jar of water, and this is key, a stick resting across the threshold. It's a sign: in use. Please wait your turn. Romans really thought of everything. For the legions especially, latrine planning was essential. Camps were built with separate drainage trenches, latrine tents, and even officers assigned to monitor sanitation. Latrines were dug downhill and always downwind, because nothing ruins a military maneuver like a cholera outbreak. You pause to examine one of the portable latrine kits on display in a roadside stall. Yes, they existed. Small ceramic pots with lids, foldable stools, and leather bags for waste disposal. The Romans' ever-practical even designed urine collection systems for tanners and fullers who needed ammonia-rich liquid to treat hides and bleach cloth. That's right. Roman businesses paid people to collect pee. You spot a young girl skipping past with a clay jug. It's labeled for the fuller. And yes, you now know what's inside. She pauses to giggle at your face. Clearly you're new around here. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some inns posted toilet rules right beside the price list. A sip of wine, 2 denarii, a night's bed, 10. Using the latrine without ordering something triple the fee. Enforcement was mostly honor system, but still nobody liked a freeloader. Historians still argue as whether these travel toilets were common outside urban centers or mainly reserved for main roads and elite itineraries. But the archaeological remains are clear. Rome brought the bathroom with them. From Hadrian's Wall to Alexandria, latrine stones, basins, and drainage channels followed the empire like loyal companions. And here's something fun to imagine a Roman traveler sitting beneath a fig tree at a rural rest stop, reading graffiti etched into the wall beside the latrine. I relieved myself here. May the gods watch over your bowels. Titus 116 CE. You can't help but smile, because even then people found time to write bathroom poetry. As you step back onto the Via Appia, the sun begins to dip low on the horizon. You pass a line of merchants, a pair of dusty soldiers, and a priest leading a donkey, each one likely carrying a version of your same thought. Where's the next toilet? And that's the thing. Rome didn't just build roads and aqueducts. It built a system, a vast, surprisingly thoughtful system to handle the messier parts of life without shame. And sometimes that system included a stick across a path and a smile from a stranger who's been there too. You've explored latrines and temples, roadside relief stops, and elite thinking chairs. But what about bathrooms in motion? Let's climb aboard something a bit more buoyant. That's right, toilets on Roman ships. You're walking now along the docks of Ostia, Rome's bustling port city. The tang of salt water cuts through the air, and gulls screech overhead as dock workers shout and sling amphorae from ships onto carts. Amid the chaos, you board a modest merchant galley bound for Neapolis, rocking gently in its berth. And you're already wondering, where does everyone go to the bathroom? On deck, you spot a small wooden box, affixed near the stern, shielded on 3 sides with slatted boards. It's humble windswept and smells vaguely of tar and salt. Congratulations, you've found the nautical latrine. On Roman ships, space was limited, and plumbing even more so, but ingenuity kept things moving. These maritime toilets were simple but effective, usually a hole cut over the waterline with a small platform for squatting or sitting, often accompanied by a rope or railing to hold on to in rough seas. Trust us, nothing builds core strength like trying to relieve yourself during a storm in the Tyrrhenian Sea. You crouch beside the wooden stall and notice a niche carved into the railing. Inside, sits a small sponge on a stick fastened with a bit of leather cord so it wouldn't tumble into the sea. Practical, eco-friendly, surprisingly modern. Historians still debate how widespread these facilities were. Large warships likely had more organized sanitation. Smaller coastal vessels probably just leaned over the side. But what's certain is that even sailors had unspoken codes of hygiene, and breaking them could cost you friends, or worse, a dry place to sleep. Here's a curious tidbit. Naval officers sometimes used chamber pots in their quarters and had them emptied discreetly by junior crew. A sign of status, sure, but also a clear way to avoid deck latrine politics. As you explore below deck, ducking beneath ropes and sacks of grain, you spot another type of latrine, a jar with a lid tucked behind a barrel. Portable, personal, and probably well used. In some cases, jars like these were emptied at sea. In others, buried ashore or dumped overboard far from port. And no, there weren't regulations. The Mediterranean was a big place. You return to the deck as the crew hoists sail, and suddenly you realize everyone on this vessel has to share one spot. No doors, no privacy, just briny air and a well-timed breeze. And yet no one complains, because like everything else in Rome, using the bathroom was a shared experience woven into the rhythm of daily life. You learned to wait your turn, to be quick, to be courteous, to face the sea and let it take what it must. You settle on a crate as the ship pulls from the dock, the coastline receding slowly behind. A boy hands you a chunk of bread, and you eat in companionable silence until a sailor groans from behind the latrine wall and mutters something about bad garum. It's a reminder, seasick or not, every Roman was human. Every Roman had needs, and every ship from fishing boat to imperial courier found a way to meet them. You laugh quietly, the wind in your hair and salt on your lips, because somehow, even here floating between cities, civilizations and centuries, Rome made room for the smallest, most necessary rituals. The ship has docked. Your sandals are dry again, thankfully, and the scent of sea spray fades behind you as you wander into one of Rome's most fascinating inventions, the balnea, the Roman public baths. Now wait, weren't we talking about bathroom breaks? Yes, and here's where it all converges, because in Rome, the bathhouse wasn't just a place to clean yourself. It was a place to chat, exercise, debate politics, and yes, take care of nature's calls. You step into a balnea just outside the city walls, not as grand as the great thermae of Caracalla, but still impressive. The stone floor is warm from the hippocaust beneath. Steam clouds the air rising off marble pools and settling on statues of Venus and Apollo. The aroma is part sweat, part eucalyptus, part something sharper. That something, the latrines. You find them tucked along one wall, clearly marked with carved reliefs, a man squatting a sponge beside him, and a jug of water nearby. Welcome to the communal toilet wing. In most Roman bathhouses, latrines were integrated into the structure, sometimes adjacent to the dressing room apoditerium, sometimes beside the hot room caldarium, always convenient. These weren't private stalls. They were stone benches with evenly spaced holes, water running underneath, and a channel in front for rinsing the communal sponge on a stick. And let's be honest, this was a social experience. You sit shoulder to shoulder with your neighbor discussing grain prices or the latest gladiator match, all while conducting your business. Awkward not for a Roman. This was daily life. Relaxation relief and reputation all handled in one visit. Mainstream historians agree the bathhouse was the ultimate public equalizer. Senators and shoemakers, lawyers and loafers all sat on the same bench. The only difference, maybe the scent of your sponge. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some bathhouses charged a small toilet fee collected by an attendant known as the Latrinarius. He maintained the flow of water, cleaned the benches, and occasionally reminded patrons not to linger too long while socializing. A multitasking hero. You watch as an older man wipes sweat from his brow, finishes his chat, and hands a coin to the Latrinarius with a wink. A young girl enters behind him, escorted by her mother, because yes, some bathhouses were co-ed or had scheduled hours for women. As you move to the tepidarium, the warm room, you pass a sign etched above the door. Here all burdens are washed away. And that includes, well, everything. Bathing and elimination were both acts of renewal. To a Roman, purging the body of waste and cleansing the skin were connected processes, symbolic as well as practical. You didn't just leave the bathhouse cleaner, you left reset. You recline now near a shallow fountain, feeling the warm tile beneath your palms, and marvel at the efficiency of it all. Public toilets, bathing massages, sometimes even snacks all under one roof. All part of a carefully choreographed experience. Historians still argue whether bathhouses encouraged hygiene or just normalized exposure. After all, the sponge system wasn't perfect. But the ideology of cleansing spiritual, social, and physical was firmly entrenched. And in the end, that's the legacy Rome left behind. Not just aqueducts or marble statues, but the idea that even something as mundane as a toilet could be part of communal life designed, honored, and even enjoyed. You close your eyes and let the sound of flowing water carry you, because in a city that prized balance, maybe this was the truest form of civilization. Everybody goes, so why not go in style? You step out from the bathhouse skin warm and limbs pleasantly heavy as the last blush of twilight settles over the rooftops. The lamps are being lit one by one along the vicus, each flickering flame casting long shadows that stretch across cobbled streets and worn marble steps. And just like that, your Roman day is winding down. But before you slip into dreams, there's one last stop to make a quiet courtyard tucked behind a modest domus, where a simple wooden bench sits beneath a fig tree. A clay lantern glows softly beside it, and a narrow stone channel hums faintly with trickling water. It's a private home toilet, unremarkable, small, but lovingly maintained. Inside, you find a single-seat bench carved into the corner, a reed mat neatly folded nearby, and a small figurine of Fortuna perched on a niche shelf above. A token of luck, a wish for comfort, a household ritual passed quietly from generation to generation. There's no crowd here, no priests, no perfumed marble, just peace, privacy, and a sense of something sacred in the stillness, because by now you understand, in ancient Rome, the bathroom wasn't just a place to go. It was a mirror of Roman life, at times public, bustling, loud, at others personal, deliberate, even reverent. From the emperor's palace to the Subura's back alley, from the galley on the sea to the roadside rest stop, each space reflected Rome's obsession with ordo, with structure, with giving every action, no matter how humble a place, a rhythm and a rule. Mainstream historians agree that Rome's sanitation system was unparalleled in the ancient world. But what truly made it remarkable wasn't just the bricks or drains or gravity-fed pipes. It was the culture, a culture that embraced the body as something to be managed, not hidden. A culture that acknowledged mess, but never surrendered to it. A culture that wove dignity into even the most undignified of human acts. And here's your final quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have discovered toilet graffiti almost everywhere, scratched into latrine walls, painted above doorways, even carved into portable chamber pots. The messages range from sweet to scandalous. Flora was here, cacator cave malum, pooper beware of evil, may your stool be swift friend. They weren't just being cheeky. They were participating in a centuries-long conversation, one that acknowledged we all go, we all hope it's peaceful, we all want to be left alone, and somehow that's deeply human. So as you stand beneath the fig tree, the air filled with the scent of loam and late summer bloom, you feel something settle inside you, not just the food or the warmth or the bathhouse steam, but the awareness that across time, space, class, and status, rest matters, relief matters, and how we treat those moments tells us more about a civilization than any grand monument ever could. Let yourself drift now. The city around you dims, the streets empty, the hearths burn low behind shuttered windows, and somewhere not far away, a sponge rests in its jar, a reed mat waits to be folded, and the gods of sewer and silence keep gentle watch. You've walked through the tiled corridors and crowded benches of a world that didn't just build infrastructure, it built intimacy, with rituals and symbols, with jokes and prayers, with walls that echoed laughter and quiet breathing alike. You've seen the elegance in the ordinary, felt the grace of structure, heard the whisper of systems designed not for glory, but for relief. And now it's your turn to rest. Let the hush settle in your chest. Let your thoughts float like olive oil on warm water, light loose, suspended. Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. No need to fix, solve, or remember. The stars that once watched over legionnaires and scribes now shine on you steady and soft. Let sleep find you slowly, like a sponge meeting cool water. Let your muscles release your mind go quiet. Your dreams arrive with sandals off and torches dimmed, and may no one disturb you. Not now, not yet, not for a long, long while.